Hey, thanks a lot for coming. It's always a great time because it also talks about that we're in this thing that's starting up, and I'm excited about it. A lot of great things happening, a lot of things happening nationally, but I want to say thank you so much for being here. Also want to shout out Jeff Jordan for making it to this year's presser, namesake, the Jordan Center. His family, him and Jennifer are just really close friends, but more importantly, Huskies. And I want to thank you so much for all you do. So let me just jump into it, because you didn't come here to see me, but I do want to just talk about a couple of things. You've got 4 major buckets happening right now, and it's interesting to kind of watch the landscape as we go. We've gone through this process of the NCAA Transformational Committee, which really has set the tempo and time of trying to get all of Division I underneath one tent. That's really been the process that Transformational Committee and its guys and its leadership. We had our very own Julie Cromer from Ohio in our conference co-chair that committee, and it's really helped us to give us an insight with our presidents, our ADs, and our staff to understand that these tenets are extremely important for us from a national stage, but also, too, that it is an ongoing process. Some of the major components coming out of that committee, mandatory mental health for our student athletes and staff, diversity, equity, inclusion, just some of the headlines, as well as just some uniformity about making sure we all work together as one, especially at the Division I level. So that's the first bucket. The other one, transfer portal. It's really changed the game, okay? Our coaches, our staff, our administrators, the understanding that that one year you're at one institution and another year you're at another, but also, too, understanding that we have to re-recruit. We have to make sure that we keep our institution, our programs vibrant. We need to make sure that we are communicating with our student athletes, because the transfer portal has really changed the game in that process. The other bucket of this is the name, image, and likeness. Understanding that NIL is here. We are in the name, image, and likeness business, so to speak, the enterprise that is, making sure that our student athletes can monetize their name, image, and likeness, and understanding what that means. The other part of that is that we're trying to look for some uniformity across all states, having some federal legislation specifically around name, image, and likeness. These are key components. We were one of the first states in the great state of Illinois to actually have a law in the books and understand what that means, and how do we navigate that, and how do we educate our students and our staff. So this is an area that from a disadvantage or advantage, that having a federal law across all 50 states is the right thing to do, and I'm quite sure our new president, Charlie Baker, at the NCAA is working really hard with congressional leaders to make sure that that happens. So again, we're looking for that to be a major change as we move forward. And lastly, but not leastly, conference alignment or expansion, or whatever you want to call it. What's interesting, in my lifetime, if someone was going to say that a major Power 5 conference would cease to be in existence, I would have said, oh my goodness, what has happened to college athletics? But in 96 hours, we saw just that, and watching a conference being the Pac-12 cease to be what it looks like now with being the Pac-4. And I know there's a lot of things that led up to that 96 hours before some of the transition and other institutions made adjustments. But to say that is to say this: there's no such thing as standing still. You're either moving forward or you're moving back. And this constant shift, this constant realignment of what we think is normal when it comes to conference expansion and conference alignment is here to stay. The great news is that the MAC, being the most stable, and you can do your research to fact check that, being the most stable conference in the country, especially FBS conference, it's a great thing. It's a great thing to be in the MAC. It's a great thing to make sure that we have the common, the shared agenda with our presidents, our ADs, and our student athletes. So all these pieces are huge for us as the conference alignment continues to change, and it will change. There will be a shock wave. There will be more change. There will be different things that will happen, and we have positioned ourselves to make sure that we have sustainable practices, both academically and athletically. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of what's going on, what I've wanted to say to you today. We've got some great coaches. We're going to talk about our fall lineup. We'll talk about certain things that are special to us today. But having said that, I'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
So how do you, I guess, balance, if you're not moving forward or moving backwards, like you said, with the stability of the MAC? I mean, does the MAC have its niche carved out? Is these teams together, is that sustainable for them going forward? Or just how do you view that?
It's interesting. It's a great question. It is a fantastic question. When I was in the Big Ten, I had a chance to look at a couple of different changes. One is the introduction of Nebraska to the conference, and the other one was Rutgers and Maryland. So I had a chance to kind of see what really drove the expansion, or quite frankly, the expansion of just like same institutions. And I would say that the MAC has the secret sauce of knowing who they are, okay? And I think that if you take a look, it really parallels what's going on with the Big Ten, in the sense that the viewership, the Midwest, the like institution, the academic, the athletic prowess, and I think what really is that really helps the MAC is that knowing who we are and then having administrators and students realize that, and not trying to pretend to be something else. And I think that's what happens when you start chasing, the rainbow, all right, the unicorn. You don't know who you are, so therefore you're trying to find something that's different. So the good news is that our presidents and chancellors know who we are. We have great academics, we have great athletics, and I think that's what bonds us. And for that to be adjusted further, it has to be something quite significant, and that's why we've been able to stay together. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of the plan for the MAC.
I guess I was just trying to get to, and that answered most of it, but I guess I was trying to get to, the two kind of, and they seem maybe conflicting things that you said, where if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards, but also the stability of it.
Yeah.
How those two battle.
Yeah, I think it's a good. No, I hear what you're saying, and that's what, quite frankly, the Big Ten had to grapple with in taking a look at outside of the so-called footprint with Maryland and Rutgers, right? I think that if you're going to add, you've got to add value. Okay, so what does that look like? Is it TV? Is it market? Is it recruiting base? All that matrix goes into the blender, and it has to spit back out to say, this is the right thing for us to do. So yes, we've had, I'm quite sure, opportunities to do different things, but at the end of the day, it's about what do they bring to the table? Because now we have so much equity within the MAC. For us to branch out, for us to do other things, I would argue that that could be a disadvantage. Because once you go down that road of change, and you're trying to capture something that, quite frankly, might not be the perfect fit, it does give us some liability and some risk. And I think that from this particular process, and we've seen other Group of Five conferences go through this transition, if it doesn't fit, it really causes a lot of stress on the member institution as well as the student athletes, presidents, and administration. So I think you're right. I think the real issue is that we feel really comfortable who we are. We're not going to say never. There's no such thing as never, that we wouldn't take a look at different things to make sure that we're in alignment. But right now, it just works really well, and that's why we've been so stable. No problem. You got it.
With the expansion of the Big Ten, of the SEC, with a lot of it being football-driven, do you see a future where we see a shakeup of what FBS 3 looks like, where it's no longer 130 teams, but rather there's another tier kind of created similar to how we have FCS football and FBS football at this time?
Yeah, no, I think it's coming. I think there's been a lot of folks that had questioned, are the super conferences going to happen? I'd say they're here. They're going to continue to gobble up. We're going to continue to make assessments on who should be where. Right now, we're going from West Coast to East Coast. We're going all over the place, right? So I think that there's going to be more change. I think that it's an indictment on the travel. I think we're going to see a data point where is this affecting student athlete well-being? As you're traveling from one coast to the other coast, and your ability to do things academically and athletically. We don't have the data points to prove any of that at this point. I think once we do, that's going to have another jarring blow to should we be doing this. But I think the money is where it is. People are chasing money. People are chasing different things to make sure that they have stability. People are chasing certainty. They don't want to be uncertain. Henceforth, the cause and effect of the things that happen with the Pac-12. I do think there's going to be a point where FBS football is going to have to make some serious decisions. Does it denote that it needs to be by itself? These are questions that come up all the time. You know, having an enterprise like FBS football requires that you put a lot of resources, a lot of man and woman power into it to make sure that it's very successful. Does it need to dictate all of the Olympic sports making a move at the same time? These are questions, right? I have my own ideas about that, but I'll just say from my perspective, it's making sure that you're not compromising standards because of the fact we're making adjustments for one or two different sports. And I believe our leadership, both at the NCAA as well as the College Football Playoff and the like, understand that. It's just, are the institutions ready to make those decisions? So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's my perspective.
Certainly. And earlier you mentioned that, and I know when we spoke back in June, that you're confident in what NIU's identity is, what the MAC's identity is. You guys know what you are. So what are you guys? What in that identity makes you guys confident in where you currently sit in the state of college sports?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think for us, the expectations are clear. Especially in football, and I would even argue in a lot of our other sports, is to win championships and to graduate at the highest level. That's our commitment. We've got donors and supporters that have that expectation. It's the reason why I came to NIU, because that's what drives me. I think we are going to have to make sure we take a look and have a pulse on the landscape. You know, that's why I talk about there's no such thing as standing still, because if you're doing that, you're moving back, you're moving someplace else. So I think it's important for us to understand ourselves, be self-aware, okay, and to also at the same time position ourselves for the next level, whatever that is. The great news is that we're in the MAC, and we understand what we need to do, and we're going to line up against BC in the very near future. And I'm really excited about that. And we're going to do the same thing with our fall sports, because we understand what that means to our student athletes and to this institution. So, good question, though.
I think with the super conferences being created here, it'll be harder for the NIUs in the world to schedule non-conference opponents like a Notre Dame, like an Ohio State, like a Michigan in the future.
Well, it's going to always be a certain level of putting the puzzle pieces together. It's always been like that. I think when you go to a larger makeup of institutions per conference, that means there's a lot more in-conference games, right? So people are looking at 9, 10, or whatever conference games. There's always going to be a need for competition, okay, and playing the best and wanting to make sure that you position yourself with the College Football Playoff Committee, that you have done the work necessary to be in that conversation, especially going into the expanded college football playoff. So there will be more of a challenge, I think, but at the end of the day, positioning ourselves as being an institution that you have to play, so you have a portfolio of wins and losses that are being evaluated by a committee to say if you're going to be able to make the next step, which ultimately is to play for a national title. So I think that, yes, there's going to be some competitiveness. There's going to be a little bit more work that's involved to make sure that we position ourselves and that we have the right scheduling format. But again, it's going to come down to wins and losses and position yourself to be that institution, that G5, that institution that, quite frankly, a win or a loss puts you in a good place from a competitive standpoint, especially when you're looking at RPI, strength of schedule, things of that nature. So that's something that we can control a lot by being one of the premier G5 schools in the country. And we've separated ourselves already. You know, we understand who we are. And as long as we continue to do that, we'll be in a good position moving forward. Good question, though.
How much, there's so many things now you have to deal with and comply with NIL, transfer portal, and assuming you had to add additional staff to help oversee all these things, how much of a financial strain has that put on the MAC schools to comply with that?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. You know, part of it is the fact that, you know, we talked about the 4 buckets today, you know, names and likeness, the transfer portal, the transformation committee, some of its recommendations. It's a constant grind, right? I think the resources there are met by our generous donors, our supporters. You know, the university has a certain pocket of money, and that's what they give. And then we have to go outside and externally fundraise and support, and also talk about the narrative. What is return? What is the return on the investment of these things, right? So I think it's an ongoing process. Put it this way, it never gets old. We have to make sure that we tell the story and position ourselves to say this is what's going on. This building is a great example of that. These buildings are a great example of that. External great Huskies came to the aid and supported us. And that's why we're here. A lot of institutions don't have this. And I'm really fortunate and humbled by that. But also, too, we have to continue to make sure that we excel academically and athletically to show that return on that investment. So, yeah, it's a lot, but we're meeting the need right now, and we can always use more. So after, by all means, love your donation. Love for that to happen. You know, I love you now. Just come on down. But, yeah, it is tough, no question.